So we're very pleased to have Representative Murphy join us today. Representative Murphy has done a lot of things to help economic development in Texas and Richardson specifically. We were talking a little while ago that he and Representative Angie Chin Button co-sponsored the legislation some years ago to get the research and development tax credit instituted back into law in Texas. And that has greatly helped companies like Texas Instruments and others choose to make their investments here in the state. And he is carrying another piece of significant legislation that we'll talk about in a moment, called the Texas Economic Development Act, that was also critical to getting large manufacturing investments in Texas. But in the meantime, he has a new portfolio, a new role in the Texas House. He has been appointed by Speaker Phelan as the chair of the Higher Education Committee. And there's a lot of interest in Richardson and in Tech Titans with higher ed. UT Dallas is wholly located in Richardson. We've got a great relationship with Richland College, part of the Dallas County Community College system. And of course, we benefit in the region from having UT Arlington, UT Southwestern, UNT, many other publicly supported systems. He is also on the Ways and Means Committee, and we'll talk about the Texas Economic Development Act when we get to Ways and Means. But Chairman Murphy, give us kind of, you're new to this, you're the chair of higher education. I'm sure every chancellor of every system has been calling you up saying, hey, here's my priority. What do you see as the business of the committee this session?
Yeah, well, thank you, Bill. And first off, let me say it's great to be with the folks from Richardson again. And if I can be associated with my sister and get her good credit, I'm going to definitely do that. My first campaign, Bill, I ran as Bob and Joni's son because my parents were well known in the community, and that worked for me. I also ran as my younger son's dad, who was a star football player. And now I'm running as Marilyn's brother. So it just works, I'll ride others' coattails. But the Higher Ed Committee, it's a tremendous honor that Speaker Phelan has appointed me to this. It's a huge, important issue for Texas. And as you may know, I served on the community college board in Houston before serving in the legislature. So I have some background in this that helps me understand the generational impact that higher education has. And I can't overemphasize that for Texas. So let's talk about sort of our resources in Texas, right? It was land and cotton, and then it was oil, and now it's people. 5.2 million is a number I recall of students we have in K through 12. We have 5 million people, coming down this pipeline for Texas. And if we do right by them, and that's an if, that's a very important question. If we do right by them, we will have a robust economy. I mean, selfishly, right? I serve in Ways and Means. I want lots of taxpayers. I believe in growing the economy. And that's how government generates revenues, not by overtaxing what we currently have, but by getting more, by attracting more industry, more investment, higher levels of productivity. I think those are the things that best propel an economy forward. And frankly, those are things that very much tie back to higher education. It's a broad scope. So I have a wonderful committee clerk. Her name's Brittany Baldovinos, and you'll get a chance to meet her. But we were going through the scope of the committee, and we literally have every institution of higher education under our umbrella. And that's community colleges, it's your 4 years, it's your 2 years, it's your TSTCs. And you start making a list of who we need to reach out to, and we realize we can't have them all come testify. It'll just take too long. But they're all embracing different parts of the food chain, and they're all important, like what you just mentioned for your community. You've got a whole series of options where, businesses could go to for workforce training, where students could go for their very first opportunity for school, where someone could get a 4-year degree, someone get an advanced degree. And so all those elements are important, and we've got to find a way to move them forward. So I'll mention 3 broad themes that I think are very, very important for higher ed and what I see. And by the way, just quickly point out, the former chair of higher ed that I served under some years ago, Dan Branch, represented Highland Park, and that's the seat Morgan Meyer has. And Morgan, by the way, is now chair of Ways and Means. So I'm getting to work with Morgan in that respect. But the first thing, Bill, is access. And it's getting more kids into higher ed. And I want to be real clear. I don't think everybody needs a 4-year bachelor's degree. That's, first off, it clogs up the system. Secondly, not every child is suited for that. Not everybody wants to do that kind of work. And oftentimes it's because they don't understand what their other options are for a 2-year degree, for a certificate, for a license, which sometimes can be the path to a 4-year degree or to a professional license, but they can also kind of start out at a lower level and frankly earn money, which ties to my second concern, which is affordability. How do we make sure that people can afford this need? I believe it's a need to go to something beyond high school. And so smart things like dual credit, advanced placement, getting credit for learning where they can get sort of placing out of certain tests and things. That is kind of a growing wave. And then the other, and they're all A's. I'm giving all A's to higher ed, is alignment. And this is really important. So that if you take a course at your community college, it needs to absolutely transfer to any 4-year school and just know that it's good. And what I learned, this is back 20 years ago, each community college had to have an articulation agreement with a 4-year institution. So if there's 12 universities you might pipeline your kids to, you had to have 12 agreements. That's awful. I mean, it's cumbersome. And I will say the coordinating board, and that's the agency we work with primarily, the Higher Education Coordinating Board. We call it the co-board. We love, acronyms, but they're the group that's really helping align that. And they are focused on this and they are aware of this issue. You don't want to pay, I don't know how old your twins are now. You don't want to pay for them to take a class that doesn't count towards their degree that they're going to get to at another school. You don't want to waste your money or their time. You delay a kid a year or two getting their degree and they might not make it. And that's just the reality. They have a baby, they get transferred, whatever happens, and all of a sudden their career or their education probably goes on pause. So making sure every step leads to the next is what we're trying to do with alignment in an academic sense. But there's another alignment that needs to occur, and that's with private industry. And that says, okay, what do you geophysical people need for seismic data interpretation? Tell us exactly what you need. We will make sure our programs reflect that, include that need, so that when they come out, they're ready to work for you. I don't need to tell you because you're in this world, but there are great paying jobs and great careers that don't have to go through the 4-year program. And so that alignment with industry, that sort of, students aren't widgets, they aren't little products. I get that. But at the end of the day, we want them to launch into the economy and we want an educated populace. I mean, both those things are important. Education is its own goal. It doesn't need to be for a job. It needs to be for engaged citizenry. That's what makes our republic strong. It's really an important value. I don't want to just dismiss it. But also understanding that people need to have a way to provide for their families, make that generational lift. A huge challenge for us, and I'm gonna stop rambling, but a huge challenge for us is we have so many people we're trying to get to go to college who have nobody in their family that can say, well, when I went to college, here's how it worked. So they see it as mysterious, expensive, challenging. So all these things we can do, like the dual credit programs, the community colleges programs, the internships, to bring it down to their level while they're still in high school and say, look, you can do that work. You've already done it. Helps us with that, make them jump into higher ed. So we've got a lot of people focused on the issue. I don't think there's ever been a time where it's been more coordinated. The community colleges at one time were kind of warring with the 4 years, and industry was sort of turning a blind eye. That's changed. We haven't all come together and figured it all out. Don't be misled. But there's a real consensus that when you look at an industry, and I'll take energy, which is a huge part of my district, most of the workers in it are like in their 50s. And the executives look and go, wait a second, in 10 years, who's going to work here? So it's just imperative we get those 5 million kids I mentioned at the beginning, coming in and taking those positions.
Well, and it seems like you're right. We're doing a better job of coordinating amongst the various main players, maybe under this umbrella of what we call the Texas 60 by 30 plan.
Exactly.
Which
Exactly.
Texas education agencies, you know, the coordinating board and the workforce commission, with the governor's support, want by 2030, at least 60% of Texans aged 25 to 34 will have either a certificate or a degree. And that's the pipeline that industry needs. So I assume that you'll be taking some hearings on 60 by 30 and our progress and how we're doing towards that goal.
Actually, I need your help on this. So I had a meeting yesterday on this, and I read multiple reports about where we are in higher ed. And I found zero data on 60 by 30. This is a numerical, yes, this is a numerical goal. Right, right. And we're in 2021. So are we at 42% of our goal, 19%? Did we make a 4% gain last year? And they tell me, oh, the data exists, we can get it to you. And I said, well, how come everybody's not asking for this? If this is our big goal.
Oh, absolutely.
How are we doing? And so that'll come around. And anyway, I think they were kind of surprised that I had done my homework, was ready for the meeting. They just walked in to chat, and I said, where are we on the 60 by 30? It's a great idea. Right. And one of the things I've read is we need to do better in the 25 plus, the people you kind of think, oh, we missed him or her because they're now 27. We need to get those people back into the education pipeline and train them or retrain them. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to forget about the 17 to 20-year-olds that are coming out of our high schools. We got to grab them early on. It's less expensive and it gets them in that next jump. I mean, the lifelong earning potential for someone with a 2-year degree is $1 million greater.
Yep.
$1 million. That's, even to a guy like you or me, that's a lot of money.
Yesterday, we had TEA Commissioner Morath as a guest speaker. And one of the concerns that he expressed because of the pandemic and, the pivot to virtual learning and, the time it took to kind of ramp up that capacity was that a lot of students really fell behind in terms of their learning progress. And, he threw out some numbers that were pretty startling. A study from Argentina in which schools just stopped because of a teacher strike for 87 days, and it had a 20-year impact on their gross domestic product in Argentina. So I would assume that you'll look at this in your committee, perhaps along with public ed, and think about what do we need to do to kind of catch students up so that they can, get into that pipeline at grade level.
Yeah, a lot of people haven't seen the data, and I'm a huge fan of Mike Morath's, and we've done some fantastic work together. The data shows there's a significant impact when a student falls just behind a little bit, and when someone's already behind, and then they take 6 months of kind of a light program, you've got some real concerns about that. So we're absolutely talking about how do we get kids back up to where they need to be. Huge issue for us. The other thing is, and you kind of mentioned it, but it's not the elephant in the room, but it's a significant issue. And that is to say, how do we make use of what we learned in COVID for distance learning, for remote learning, for, on-time delivery of, educational product? If I'm watching a lecture, I can do that in my PJs from home. Now, I can't do a lab experiment, although I have learned you can do virtual labs and things don't blow up. So there's some advantages. But there's a whole blended learning element that I think we can do more of. And particularly for our higher ed folks, it helps diminish their need for facilities if, some of that learning is occurring elsewhere and only certain things occur together. But I don't believe, and I want to be very clear, that you can turn college, particularly college, into an online experience because you have to engage. That's the experience of you and I are in a class together, and you give your perspective and I give mine and the professor gives hers. And that interaction is what college is about. So you can't, we can sort of achieve that online like we're doing now, but it's really not the same. And so, but we can, I think, spread that learning out a bit and not have it so concentrated to be on campus.
Well, and it's part of the maturing process for a lot of kids to have that college experience. And the same held true for my wife and I. We were ready for the twins to leave the coop. And you asked earlier how old they are. They're going to be 21 years old come March the 13th. They're both
Okay.
one at Texas Tech and one at Tarleton State. And, they came home during the pandemic, and I could tell that they weren't getting the same experience as they would have had they been on campus. So, but I want to pick up on something you just said, and I know this is of great interest to every higher education institution in Texas. You mentioned the word facilities, and that you know where I'm going to go with this.
Yes, please do.
Have a tuition revenue bond bill this session.
I don't know how that's going to fare. We're so tight on revenue. Our revenues are about the same. They're only $1 billion less. Isn't that crazy to even talk like that? But it's true. So our budget's about $240 billion. We're going to have about $1 billion less of state revenue to spend. So it's not a big change, but you have to remember, we have a little bit of inflation and you have some growth. So you really probably needed 4 or 5% more just to kind of stay at a par. So we're going to have to, make some adjustments. And so the question for the TRBs, which is where actually the state funds the TRBs. They're not funded by tuition. That's kind of a misnomer. And I say that to you, Bill, because a lot of my colleagues who've not delved into this don't understand that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but they're going to have to really make the case that we can't wait 2 years. We got to have it now. And by the way, we learned all of our lessons from COVID and have implemented that sort of, offset before that comes to pass. So I think the bar has been raised significantly in terms of, the ease of access. But I mean, there are campuses that are just tighter than a tick with, high classroom utilization, high student station utilization. Those are the two factors that make up our matrix that talks about how well used you are and are growing. There are communities where programs are just oversubscribed. And thank goodness, because when it comes to things like the nursing shortage, man, oh man. So certain specialized programs, nursing, engineering, may see some rifle shot kind of help.
My daughter is a nursing student out of Texas Tech.
Okay, great.
There were 75 slots for over 1,000 applicants. Yeah. So
and the sad thing is, Bill, we need the 1,000.
Yeah.
Tech needs more capacity because we just don't have enough coming out. I mean, we're that baby boom era that's going to put a burden on healthcare like you've never seen. Healthcare outpaced education for the first time this last session in the state budget. Education used to be our #1 expenditure. Now it's healthcare.
Right.
And with healthcare inflation and with the baby boom, that's going to continue.
So I'm going to pivot to Ways and Means and to Chapter 313, but I want to ask the audience if you want to ask a question of Chairman Murphy, please put it in chat and I'll go ahead and read it out. Chairman Murphy has also been appointed to the House Ways and Means Committee, and he is the author of House Bill, I believe it's 1556.
Excellent. Yeah.
Which is an effort to reauthorize what is known as the Texas Economic Development Act, which allows school districts to provide an economic incentive to large manufacturing projects, renewable energy, et cetera, to reduce the property tax burden they would otherwise have to pay. Chairman Murphy, can you kind of walk us just, briefly through what that is? Why is it so important? Why does it matter?
Well, so Texas is a low tax state, and people say, "Oh, that's great," and there's no personal income tax, and we all think, "Oh, phone it in. We're done on the tax issue. We must win every battle." And the truth of it is, when it comes to property taxes, we're number 46 out of 50, with 50 being the worst. So it's 46 on the worst scale. And that's because we don't have a personal income tax. So we're highly dependent on property taxes, which for many companies in the service world, it's not a big deal. But if you're a manufacturing, if you're a power plant, if you're making Toyotas, like in San Antonio, those property taxes in Texas stick out like a sore thumb. And when they're talking about, well, where should we locate? First off, we start out with a higher property tax bill, and then other states are doing things to have incentives. So it's both an area where we have a disadvantage and a really focused group of competing states. Now, we do a good job in education, infrastructure, taxes, personal taxes and regulations. So what we've said is for a 10-year period, only a 10-year period, we'll give you a starter rate. We'll give you a reduction, not a zero tax, but a lower property tax. And only for things, Bill, that are major assets that have a useful life that's like 30 years. So yes, you'll have lower taxes for 10 years, but then for the next 20, 30, 40 years, that plant isn't moving anywhere and it's going to generate significant revenues long term. And let me point out something that is largely misunderstood or is misunderstood in some places. And that is, this is not a program about adding jobs. We have lots of programs that talk about number of jobs and incentives to get jobs. This is about capturing assets, right? Large scale assets. They often come with jobs, but we don't want to overburden the school district or the highways. The idea is let's bring these large assets, let's give them a starter rate. And like in Toyota, all these other companies then want to come be around that major plant. Usually when you get one major investment, other things want to be around it. And so there's a carry-on or a follow-on effect from these programs that's pretty significant. But no, and the thing I want to emphasize to you, look at all the conversations we had about onshoring jobs, about bringing more things back to America. People are realizing, I don't want to be in a third world country. It's not dependable. I might lose my assets. I'd rather keep them here in the US. So we're poised, if we position ourselves correctly, to really benefit from a new wave of manufacturing opportunities here in Texas. And, we have power and roads and a good workforce. So we just need to make sure that we're doing okay in the tax world as well. Oops.
Yep, we lost your video there.
I did. I'm sorry. That was, I'm working from my home office here, and that was a phone call. So sorry.
So to make sure that everybody understands this, the value limitation that is available to companies that receive a Chapter 313 agreement does not apply to debt service. It's only on operations and maintenance, correct?
Right. And in fact, in the bill I've written, and I want to be real clear, my bill is not just a straight, reauthorization, let's keep doing it.
Right.
I make a number of tweaks to the program to I think, learn from the lessons. And one of those is to say they will also pay their enrichment taxes. So that if you're in a school district where the voters and the board have said, hey, we want to have higher taxes to better help our schools more than the average, the new project will have to pay those taxes from day one, along with the INS, the debt service taxes from day one in full on the full value of the project. There's no reduction there. And then the other thing is we've said, hey, we want to make uniform any sort of payments to the local school district by doing those two things, as opposed to every deal being haggled out differently, which, for some, I don't want to pick on them, but for some of our smaller rural districts, they may or may not have the expertise or the desire to do that. And so we've put most of the certification, most of the monitoring, most of the ensuring they're following the requirements of the program, including new penalties that we put in place, into the Comptroller's office. So they have enough funding. So there's funding in this bill and the personnel to make sure this program really does what we've promised it will do. And you've got to have accountability. And I think the Comptroller's runs a super shop, Glenn Hegar, and I think that's a good place to do this.
He will be our guest starting at 11 o'clock this morning.
Oh, really? Well, give him my regards.
Absolutely. So yeah, again, so everybody knows, that tool was absolutely essential for our ability to get Texas Instruments to do their initial project in Richardson and then to do it again here recently. And, it's just a tremendous asset that'll keep providing tax benefits to both the school district, the city, the county. For decades to come. That is that's a decades-long investment. That's not just a 3 or 5 year investment. That's
well, and we're still compiling the data, but we have literally billions of dollars, and like Carl Sagan, billions and billions of dollars of value coming on from existing agreements where we brought them online. And you're right, it's a long-term payoff for local communities, but that also helps the state. Every time a local community gets revenues that help shore up the finances, there's less pull on the state revenues. We went through a major shift this past time around, past session, to lower local property taxes by putting in more state money. And that 313 program really positions us long-term, to keep the balance in place.
Well, I want to open it up to the audience for any questions. We've got a little bit of time left and want to be respectful of Chairman Murphy's time. So if you just want to raise your hand or put something in chat, don't be bashful. Amanda, I can't believe you're not going to ask Chairman Murphy a question.
I apologize for jumping in the middle of it. There's so many things going on today with Article 3 and Chairman Wilson having his first meeting in House Appropriations as well, and all the energy resources. I was like trying to be everywhere at once, but I'm so thrilled to meet you. I'm Amanda Rocco with UT Dallas. And we're really excited to work with you. And I really want to thank the Chamber for having you here today, hearing some of your priorities and the things that you're focused on and what matters to you is really helpful. Hearing what you talked about 60 by 30 and measurements. And I think, I hope that the reason that you don't see the data that you're expecting is because Harrison Keller is about to just wow you with a bunch of data.
I love Harrison. He was serving with Speaker Craddock when I first came in.
That's right.
Our relationship goes back to then. And I always kind of thought, that guy's going somewhere.
He is. Yeah, we are just thrilled that he is the commissioner, and we love that he wants to retool 60 by 30 and add some an element of research to it. At UT Dallas, we're a highly focused on research. 85% science, engineering, and business, and so adding a research element to that 60 by 30, I think, is going to be a real benefit. And so hopefully he retools the whole thing in a way that gives us all major points to be pushing toward.
Well, when you look at what they've done in the Boston area, what they do in California, you see the impact of research universities are tremendously significant in terms of building a pipeline of that industry. Mm-hmm. And the people that are flexing from, company A to company B, they may be all bioscience people, but they jump around to different companies. They may be engineering people, but they jump around to different companies. And we need a larger pool of those kinds of people.
Well, we agree. And I think you would, your comments about in-person education, it's very hard to do research online. And, our students at UT Dallas are gobbled up by industry. And it's because they're working on the real-time research projects and things that are happening right now. And I would make that as when you talked about TRBs, I don't think there's a better time to spend that kind of money right now, but that's what I do for a living. We feel like the way that the travel industry is just going to roar back. We think higher ed is going to roar back when things start to open up and people feel comfortable again. We feel like the students are going to come in leaps and bounds, and we want to be prepared. It takes a good 10 years to get a building built at a university. So I hope that as those issues come around and that appropriations and Senate Finance thinks they can find the money for TRBs, because we are certainly hopeful that infrastructure could be on the table at this time, especially for schools like UTD that do have a space deficit at the top 2 in the country, in the state, because we've just grown so fast.
Yeah, we'll certainly look at the data on that. And I'm very interested. As I told you, there's going to be some rifle shot opportunities there. And we recognize, particularly because we didn't do anything last session, that need has not gone away.
Yeah. Well, it's really great to meet you. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Amanda. Appreciate it.
Amanda's worked very closely with Chairman Branch when he was chair of higher ed.
Okay.
And her former president, David Daniel, to get that package of legislation through that Branch often called Tier 1 research university legislation. Mm-hmm. And it really became an accelerant for emerging research universities like UT Dallas, University of Houston, others around the state to become national research powerhouses. And so we're very appreciative of what Representative Branch did, and Amanda's just a great resource. She knows where all the skeletons are, so rely on her. Anybody else have a question for Representative Murphy? I want to be respectful of his time. Okay. Any final comments, sir?
Well, I will just tell you one little story that occurred years ago when I was doing the Committee on Manufacturing and we did the R&D tax credit. We had a professor come in to tell us a story about a young man who he had in his program, and he taught plant operation, how to be a plant operator, and it was a license and a certificate. And he had a custom that if you were a student of his and you graduated and you got a job, you had to come back and buy him a 6-pack of beer. And that was his payoff. I'm sure that was illegal, but they did it anyway. And so he had a student that had really kind of struggled in high school, got his GED, came back, went to community college, and got his his license with the program. And he came back and saw the professor, and he was driving a brand new F-150, and he's telling the professor what he's making. He's making close to 80 grand, and there's overtime, and he might make 6 figures of money. And the professor said, "Okay, now hold on a second. If you're going to buy me a 6-pack of beer, you better come back and buy me some Heineken." And the young man said, "Professor, I'd be happy to, but you got to wait a couple of months. I'm not 21 yet." And what I love about that story is it tells you that there are opportunities in the Texas economy that are wonderful for individuals and for families if we can produce that alignment that we're talking about. And so I love that story. And this is, Brazosport, and so it's a real deal. True story. It's kind of fun, but it's indicative of if we do things right, what we can do, not just for industry, not just giving their plant operators, but to help these families have the American dream. And I think that's what we're trying to achieve in higher ed. It's a great way to do it. And what Amanda talked about, let's get some research facilities in place to pull down that private industry money. That's a smart way to invest. So we're going to be looking ways to be smart and judicious with our dollars and to do right by people in Texas.
Well, thanks for your leadership. Thanks for your time. Thanks for all your friendship over the years. And we'll be working together a lot this session on both higher ed and economic development issues. So ladies and gentlemen, please, do a little round of applause, if you would, for my friend, Chairman Murphy. Thank you for having
Bill.
me.
I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. So you're welcome to stay, or you can go about your business, sir. We're going to have Representative Leach joining us in about 5 minutes.
Well, give my colleague my best, and certainly when you have a chance to visit with our chairman, please do that as well.
You bet. Will do.
All right. Thank you, Bill.
The rest of you might as well just go ahead and stay on, because we'll have Representative Leach on here in just a few moments. And so if you need to take a little break or something like that, that's fine. And we'll look forward to having Jeff
Hey, Matt Foster. I haven't heard your company mentioned in any of this news article stuff going on the last week or so. I guess that's congratulations.
Yeah, so far so good. So far so good.
Hey, Matt, do you want to introduce the comptroller?
I certainly can.
Why don't you do that? I'll kick it off and then turn it over to you. Just introduce him. And then I want him to talk about three things, and maybe you could ask him to do this. I want him to talk about the current state of the economy, how that's affecting state revenues, and particularly in light of, what we just went through, what impact that's going to have, and then kind of what's going on in the comptroller's office.
Okay.
Amanda, are you getting things fixed at your house from the broken water pipes? Amanda?
Sorry, cloning myself here.
No problem.
So yeah, I do. I have hot water and I have 2 new hot water heaters and I have a busted pipe that's been fixed and we're back to normal, just a little lighter in the wallet.
Yep. Hopefully all that will get reimbursed by insurance. Or some of
Well,
it.
since I just moved into my house 3 months ago, I was able to claim my home warranty, actually.
There you go.
Just didn't really talk about there being a big storm,
Yeah, yeah. Bad equipment.
Thanks for having Murphy. That was great. I wish I'd heard the beginning of it, but he's going to be. I loved how he was talking. I think his history with technology and economic development is going to be a really great angle for him and for us.
Yeah.
Bill, what's his background? What is his occupation? Do you know?
Hold on, I will find out.
I mean, I was very impressed with his comments there. And Amanda, what you were saying about we really need to, expand that program and get y'all ready for whenever those. I agree with you. I think the students are going to come back in droves, to the schools.
Mhm.
So.
Yeah, I mean, we think that they're going to come back, and we also think that the international students are going to come back like crazy. They were really holding off a lot due to some of the, national politics, but then also they're not interested in online. So I think the combo of the national scene and in-person classes will, I think it'll be a game changer. We
Agreed.
had enrollment decline for the first time since 1997 at UTD.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
Mhm.
Mark, I believe that Representative Murphy's, business is in commercial real estate.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, that's interesting that he has that perspective and being in, that's a different type of job there. So it's interesting.
Absolutely.
Good. Good.
Sarah Bonser, welcome. Good to see you again today. Thanks for being with
Thank
us.
you. My pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Morning, Superintendent. How are you this morning?
Doing fine, thank you. Just bouncing between meetings, lots going on.
How many of your campuses suffered some damage because of, water line breaks or other things?
Right now, 33, and then 4 other facilities. Some obviously much more significant than others. So a lot.
Yeah,
We're open. We're open and kids are back in class, so it's good.
my youngest daughter, attended Plano Senior and went through the animal science program there where they have that kind of barn facility up near the
Yeah,
PSA.
Alma.
Did that suffer any damage? Were you able to maintain power there?
No, we didn't. In fact, that was one of during that week, we had people out there checking the animals. And so our teachers actually went up and fed the animals and made sure they were all inside and warm and safe. So we did do animal checks and the animals were fine. So.
Yeah, as many times as I went up to that PSA facility for an athletic event, it never occurred to me until Maggie went through that animal science program that you actually had cows
Barn.
and pigs and lambs and
Yeah.
pretty interesting program.
Good
Yeah,
program.
It's a great program. It's
It is.
really, really
It
good
is.
for the kids.
She would have to get up, earlier than anybody in the household, and she had a 0-hour class, and she'd have to go up and take care of the pig that she was raising. And I mean, it really taught her some valuable lessons about responsibility and just,
Oh, yeah.
you
Yeah.
got to stick with it. And
Yeah. Yeah, it is a commitment.
it is.
It really is. I mean, it's a commitment and a responsibility. So, and for
I have to
some
say,
kids,
though,
it's a massive college scholarship because when they sell their animals, some of those kids are making a lot of money on their animals to go to college. It's great.
well, in Maggie's case, Ollie didn't make it past the judging. He went to the slaughter truck. And, when he's a cuddly 38-pound little piglet, it's one thing. When he's kind of a pain in the 250-pound thing, I don't think she was sorry to see that pig go.
Animal science.
Yeah. Representative Leach, there
We sure
go.
do enjoy ham, don't we, Bill?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not going to speculate whether Ollie was served on one of our plates, though.
Let's not go there.
Representative Leach.
Is Jeff here? Oh my.
You're muted.
Your audio is muted.
There-
Did we lose him?
Just a second, y'all.
Good. That's good. Hey, that might be his best speech he's made in a while.
Hey,
There he is. Good morning.
can y'all see and hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Or Jeff.
Good. How are y'all?
Good.
Good.
Thanks for spending some time with us on a very busy day there in Austin, and appreciate it very much. And so we've just concluded a session with your friend Representative Jim Murphy, talk about higher ed and economic development. You may not know this, but his sister Marilyn Carruthers was a principal in the Plano school system that my children went to Aldridge Elementary, where she was principal. And we love Marilyn Carruthers. So it's a good connection into your district.
Yeah, she's great. I think is she at Carlisle Elementary now, or is she still is she at Aldridge?
No,
She's retired.
Oh, is she retired now?
yeah. So we appreciate you being with us and welcome. This is our virtual fly into Austin. We're doing a series of public policy briefings with leaders like yourself. Right after this, we will have a meeting with the state controller, Glenn Hegar. And then at lunch, we will listen to Harold Dutton being interviewed by the Texas Trib as the new chair of House Public Ed. And so just as a reminder to everybody, if you would like to ask a question to Representative Leach, please put it in the chat. And so again, I want to thank our sponsors, UT Dallas, Spectrum Business, and Unicom Engineering for helping to support our virtual fly-in. And tomorrow we will hear from Representative Angie Chen Button. Hoping that we can get Speaker Phelan scheduled at some time, but if it's not this week, maybe later. And so we appreciate having my good friend Jeff Leach with us. Is this your 4th term in the House? Fifth term. Man, time flies. You don't look any older. I mean,
Oh my goodness, I feel it. I feel it.
Just hairier.
And you're being, yeah. I've got my COVID beard still working.
it looks good.
Hey,
It looks good.
Looking distinguished there, Jeff.
So,
I like
Mark,
it.
is that Mark Solomon? Mark, how are you, my friend?
Good.
Good to see you.
Don't anybody tell you to shave it, Jeff. Keep it on. Keep it
I
going.
need to trim it for sure. But we're not here to talk about my beard, are we? I mean, I guess we can if y'all really want to.
no. So Representative Leach was reappointed by Speaker Phelan as chair of the Judiciary and Civil Jurisprudence Committee in the House. So his second tour of duty chairing that important committee. He also was appointed to the Juvenile Justice and Family Issues Committee. And so Chairman Leach, we want to hear from you kind of what your priorities are, particularly with respect to the Judiciary and Civil Jurisprudence Committee. I think probably one of the governor's emergency items is going to come your way, and we'd like to hear more about that in terms of employer liability protection. You've also been pretty vocal about, what happened during the winter storm and kind of your thoughts about that. And then that'll consume quite a bit of time, and then we'll open up to some Q&A. So why don't we start with your committee and kind of what you see happening in it this session and your priorities.
Yeah, Bill. Well, thanks for having me, and it's good to be with everybody. I'm sorry we can't be together in person, but look forward to hopefully that changing soon. And it's always great to spend time with Richardson Chamber, and look forward to working with you to make this session productive for the people of Texas and for our community and for our district. And just like I've always done, Bill and Amanda and Mark, I see Tom on there. I think Sarah, I heard Sarah Bonzer as well. I'm committed in word and deed to working with you, communicating with you. I'm always a phone call away. And tell you this session is so uniquely challenging. Every session, this is my 5th session, Bill, as you mentioned. And after every session, I always get home from Austin and breathe a little bit. And I think it can't get any more challenging than that. I've thought that literally every session, 13, 15, 17, 19. And I'm like, that was the hardest it will ever be. That's the most challenging it'll ever be. And then 2021 rolls around, and we have the state's costliest natural disaster last week. That winter storm is going to end up being more costly than Hurricane Harvey, which took the #1 spot just a few years ago. You have that in the middle of a pandemic. And so what was already going to be a challenging session just got all the more challenging. But that said, we're uniquely positioned to have a really great, productive session. I'd rather be in Texas than in any other state right now, especially economically speaking. From a budget perspective, we're in a really strong position to fund our priorities, including public education at the top of the list, and higher education, which is so integral and vital to our district, to fund transportation and roads and infrastructure. In terms of your question, our courts, as chair of the Judiciary Committee in the Texas House, we're hard at work making sure that our courts are open and accessible, that people have a fair and transparent, strong, reliable civil and criminal justice system, and that courts are open, whether that's in person or virtually. I can't tell you just the strength and resiliency of our judiciary should surprise no one, but it really has been just amazing how our judges all across the state at all levels have ensured that the drumbeat of justice rolls on. And that's our charge as a committee this session. In terms of the COVID liability bill, and then I'll be quiet and take your next question. I am the actual author of the governor's emergency item on COVID liability. And the basic premise of the bill is to make sure that that businesses, that nonprofits, this is going to actually apply to churches, to nonprofits, to public and private entities. So UTD would be included in this, our hospitals, our places of business, our schools, churches, to make sure that you are protected from frivolous lawsuits relating to COVID or in a time of pandemic. There was so much unknown. There's still so much unknown in terms of how we protect our employees, our clients, our customers, our students, our worshipers, people that come into our place of business or place of worship or educational establishment. And we want to make sure that you're protected from the unknown. And so that's what that bill is going to be all about. But Bill, I'll be quiet now. Happy to be with you today, and I'll take any other questions you've got.
How would the protections under that bill relate to any action that a plaintiff would bring in a federal court?
This will not affect federal actions, although there is federal legislation that's being considered in Washington. Senator Cornyn's actually leading the charge on that. I by the way, don't really think that has a good chance of passing. It possibly could be in the new COVID finance package that comes out, but I just don't know if there's going to be federal protections, which is why we're doing it at the state level.
And so what would that protection look like?
So there's really two issues. Number one, let's just take, business owner, let's take restaurant owner as an example. Restaurant owner decides to open, let's say the government allows the restaurant to open at 50% capacity and strongly suggests that there be social distancing, that unless you're eating or drinking, you have to wear masks. And let's say that restaurant owner actually goes above and beyond, which many of our business owners of all types did this. They invest in putting up plexiglass. They are socially distancing. They've removed tables from their establishment. They've done everything, gone above and beyond at their own expense in many instances to protect their employees and their clients. Well, let's say that someone comes in and then gets COVID and then has hospital bills, or let's say someone passes away from COVID, and there's some crafty plaintiffs lawyers out there that would love to sue that establishment and sue that establishment's insurance company. We've seen this time and time again throughout the years. And so what this bill will do is to protect that restaurant owner unless there's gross negligence, unless they were so grossly negligent that, they were exposing people knowingly, intentionally, recklessly to COVID. There's also a whole other issue that we'll have a discussion on, is how you prove causation, how you prove where someone actually got COVID. There's absolutely no way that I've seen, and I've talked to medical experts about this, where you can prove that individual got COVID at that time, at that place, because of the certain failures of the establishment to do things to protect their clients and employees. So that's really what this bill is going to do, is it's going to be retroactive. We typically don't pass bills around this building. In fact, I can't remember a bill I've voted on, certainly not one I've authored, that actually is retroactive. This bill will be, if we get it passed in the form it's in now, retroactive. So current lawsuits that have been filed this year against employees, and there haven't been a lot, but there's a pipeline of lawsuits forming. They will actually be kicked out as a result of this bill passing, which I think is good for Texans and it's good for Texas business owners.
Gotcha. One of the other bills you filed that I'm just curious about is House Bill 1368 relating to election fraud. Can you just briefly describe what that bill does?
Yes, so it increases the penalty for to election fraud. It's currently I didn't actually know you were going to ask me, so I don't want to say something that's not true. I think it's currently maybe a Class B or Class C misdemeanor, and we're going to just increase the penalty one level. Texans can count on the integrity of our elections here. It's not to say we're perfect, that there's no election fraud, but I have been very vocal in making sure voters are confident in our elections. While some other states may not be the same way, and some of it may be true, some of it may not be. Here in Texas, we do things pretty well, but there are some instances of voter fraud. There's just there are, and we want to give our DAs and the Attorney General the ability to pursue heightened penalties for people who knowingly commit voter fraud.
I think it makes it a
That's what
state
that bill
jail
does.
felony.
Say it again.
I think it makes it a state jail felony.
Yeah, it's a state jail felony. There was a push to, there are some groups that want to increase it to a second degree felony. I don't think that's likely to happen, but that bill will probably ultimately, there will be an election integrity bill that's passed. It's one of the governor's emergency items. It's on the lieutenant governor's list of priorities. And so there will be an election integrity omnibus bill that passes. And so I'm not even sure that we'll end up pushing that 1368 very hard on our own.
When do you anticipate the speaker is going to release the priority bill list?
He's already starting to. So for instance, I'm filing, just yesterday, I filed House Bill 19, which is part of his priority list, which is a commercial trucking bill that's real important to businesses of all sizes, whether you got a company that's running 18-wheelers or you're a landscape company. It's protecting those companies as well from frivolous lawsuits. That's HB 19. He does it a lot differently than the Lieutenant Governor does, where Lieutenant Governor releases a whole list. Over the next few days, I imagine by this time next week, you'll have all the speakers, usually HB 1 through HB 25 that will be released and filed in a few days.
Talk for a little moment about HJR 72, you proposed constitutional amendment to prohibit the state or a political subdivision from prohibiting or limiting a religious service conducted by a religious organization.
Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up, Bill. This is the first bill I filed. It's a constitutional amendment, like you said, protecting our churches and houses of worship, our mosques, our synagogues from government action that would close them. And let me be very clear. I so appreciate our faith leaders in cooperation with government officials being good citizens and figuring out ways to temporarily shut down and not congregate people, especially in the early days of the pandemic, and figure out how to do services online and whatnot. I fully support that and think that's the right thing to do. But really, this is in reaction to some of the alarming things that we've seen happen, Bill, in other states, specifically California and New York and some other states as well, where you've had unilateral action from a governor or a county judge or a mayor, and they've shut down, like in the case of New York City, the mayor of New York shut down synagogues and then fined them in some instances $5,000, $10,000 a day. And then in the case of a church in California that was shut down, when they were allowed to reopen because of such immense public pressure, the governor said, okay, you can reopen, but you can't sing, you can't chant, you can't congregate, you can't do the things that people do when they worship as their faith dictates. And I just think that's wrong. I just think it's wrong under penalty of law to tell people that we're going to abridge your First Amendment freedoms even in a time of emergency. So that's what that bill does, and I'm hopeful it'll be bipartisan. I think it will.
Speaking of emergencies, you've been pretty vocal about, I think perhaps anger may even be the right word about, what happened to, people around the state from, this natural disaster. And I think you were without power at your home for a number of days as well.
Yeah, I'm furious at what happened last week. We're actually holding hearings right now at the Capitol, the first set of hearings, the first of many hearings on what happened, why it happened. Bill, what happened last week was completely unacceptable. It was a massive failure at so many levels. The state government is ultimately responsible. The buck stops with us. I said it last week and I'll say it now. We got to fix this. It should not have happened. And we're going to get the right answers. We're going to ask the tough questions and make sure it never happens again. I mean, look, you had people in our district. I was on rolling blackouts. Most of the people, about 75% of the people in our district, of about 200,000 people, were on some form of rolling blackout. But there were about 10% of the people in our district who didn't have any interruption in power at all. So, for instance, in middle of Plano, there are neighborhoods in the middle of Plano that did not have any power interruption, not even for a single second last week, and literally less than 2 miles away in Canyon Creek in Richardson, which was a big problem area. And we were focused on it. Julie's on the call. Julie, my district director, just such an amazing job helping me field over, I think, 2,000 messages from constituents, many of who were in Canyon Creek, and they were without power in some instances for over 80 hours straight. And so, we're going to ask questions of ERCOT, the PUC, the Railroad Commission, of our providers, Encore and CoServe, and many others, Centerpoint in Houston. And we're going to try to figure out what went wrong and how we make sure it doesn't happen again. And I'll tell you, one of my big concerns, one of the things that frankly ticked me off more than anything, is just the failure in communication. We had a Category 5 hurricane approaching our state last week, or two, that we knew about 14 days ago. And how we typically prepare for hurricanes and hurricane season in this state. It's batten down the hatches, everybody prepare. In some instances, we paint a very worst case scenario. In some instances, cities are ordered to be evacuated. I mean, we are given dire warnings about how to prepare. And we take it seriously in the state, as well we should. And that same thing should have happened here for the entire state, and it didn't. In fact, we were told the opposite. We were told by ERCOT that we're fine, we're prepared for this, we're going to be okay. There might be some rolling blackouts, but our generating equipment and capacity will not be jeopardized, and that was just flat out wrong. So I know you're mad, I know you're angry, and I'm right there with you, and we're going to do everything we can to fight for answers.
Absolutely. Yeah, just amazing that they would not have, warned, about the depth of the danger, because, I mean, all you have to do is listen to the weather forecaster, seeing that polar vortex coming our way, and you knew we were going to get, sub-freezing temperatures for an extended period of time. And, thank God we didn't get an ice storm here in North Texas. That just would have made it 10 times worse.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was just one alarm, one fire after another last week as we were helping individual constituents, but then we were working with ERCOT and CoServe and Encore to get answers. And then, of course, there was a period of about 3, 4, maybe 6 hours my days are running together, last Wednesday, when we were under direct threat for the North Texas Municipal Water District to be basically taken offline for 2 days. We fought, talk about a great team effort between our state, federal, and local officials. I mean, we went to work together and were able to prevent that from happening. I don't know if the mayor's on the call, I know, or Dan Johnson, but they just did a great job mobilizing the forces from Richardson, and we were able to prevent that from happening together.
Yeah, Mayor Velker is on the call. He just gave you a thumbs up there. And, Councilman Solomon, and I know our deputy city manager's on. Does anybody have a question that would like to ask Representative Leach? I want to be respectful of his time because we've only got 5 more minutes before Comptroller Hegar joins us. So now's your time if you want to ask a question or make a comment.
Bill, I'll ask a question to Jeff. He's on the redistricting committee too, isn't he?
I was last session. I'm not this session, but I'm.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
But
I just wondered what you thought the new districts were going to population is going to be, Jeff. Do you have any idea on that yet or not?
No, Mark. And to be honest with you, we're probably not going to get those numbers until the census numbers until this summer, which means we'll likely be back in a special session late summer or early fall, possibly mid-fall, to draw maps, which is going to move the primary back. I mean, next year's elections are going to be interesting, and not only in terms of the maps, but also in terms of the timing. So I hate to tell you, I don't know, but I don't know.
That's knowledge right there. So yeah. Okay.
Mayor Velker, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Jeff for joining us, and I appreciate his, especially on this weather emergency, really taking the bull by the horns and diving into it. You know, I think I commented on one of your Twitter social media posts about how we, as a city, and me personally, are business friendly. I'm not a big, heavy regulatory type of person. The state of Texas isn't like that. We deregulated the energy sector for a reason. We have our own grid for a reason. And I just want to make sure that we don't let the pendulum swing too far in the context of evaluating what the challenge was and why this happened. Fully wanting the state to investigate that and understand that, but also understand that this goes way beyond just the role of ERCOT. And, the industry itself is a complicated beast between generation, transmission, access, the different roles of different governments, bodies, cities, counties, state, with respect to overseeing that, the PUC. I think all of this needs to be looked at in the whole and in the context of what happened 10 days ago. And so I would recommend, if you're looking at this, that we look at more of the carrots and less of the stick, and how we can get things like winterization done this time compared to 2011, when I think the PUC asked them to do that. The challenge with going beyond asking is that is in effect regulation. So I just ask that you be mindful of that spirit of analysis when you're going through this. I sure hope, I think I said in the post, that if an industry and businesses have been deregulated, and with that deregulation comes responsibility on their part. And if they don't stand up to that responsibility, they only have themselves to blame if they become more heavily regulated. So I'd prefer that they not, but if they don't listen, to certain degrees, that's probably action that either you as a legislature or the PUC will probably have to do.
Yeah, Mayor, it's good to see you, and I couldn't agree with you more. We're going to, like I said, ask the right questions and find the right solutions, but we've got to be very careful and cautious to make sure that that we don't go too far for either political reasons or just to make ourselves feel good at the moment. This is a complex issue, and our system is built for 110 degree summers, not negative 10 degree winters.
Right.
And there's a reason for that. But at the same time, we can't let what happened last week happen again. I still, like I said earlier, maintain that we so much of this was just a failure in communication, a failure in preparedness. Typically, with few exceptions, the people of Texas, the people of Richardson are resilient, they're smart, they're strong, they can be trusted. And even if you have to deliver bad news, especially when you have to deliver bad news, you tell people the truth, you trust them, you come alongside of them and help them prepare. And look, make no mistake, we've got to make changes to our system, and we will, including winterization and all that, but also just making sure that we're being honest with people and communicating with people.
Absolutely. And if you need any input from me in writing or testimony wise, I'm more than willing to be there.
Representative Leach, thanks for joining us today. Good luck in the mission that you're undertaking this session. I think, we already knew it was going to be harder with, fewer resources than you had last session and redistricting. And now, of course, as happens all sessions, something comes in from out of the blue that, it's just totally upends kind of the agenda. And it was this massive winter storm. And so it's just compounded the difficulty. So we're pulling for you, and I know that you'll be in constant communication with us.
Thank you, Bill. And thanks to everyone else. Like I said, call me anytime. Bill, feel free to share my cell phone with everybody. I'm always a phone call away, and tell my friend Glenn Hegar hello for me.
He's actually on with us right now.
Comptroller.
How are you, man? You doing all right?
I'm doing great.
There's
Good to
Lynn.
hear from you.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Y'all don't take it easy on the comptroller, all right?
I'm gonna say, I tell you what, I'm gonna answer their questions, but I'm gonna take all the complaints and I'm gonna save them for you, okay? Because I know you're real good at taking complaints.
Yeah, I'm getting used to it, my friend. Good to see you. God bless all
All
of you.
right, take care, man. Later, Leach.
All right, thanks.
Thanks. Comptroller, thanks for joining us this morning. How are you?
I'm good, Bill. Y'all doing all right?
We're doing okay. We're like other, Texans, we're recovering, and we're going to make it out of this. But man, there's a heck of a lot of cleanup going on.
There's a unprecedented amount of cleanup that people have, either in their homes, their businesses, issues that we're going to have to deal with, to ensure that we don't have an event like this ever again. I mean, we can't prevent winter weather storms, but we can surely work to prevent millions of people being without power for days. Rolling blackouts are one thing. It's not something we want to accept every year. A once in a decade or once in a lifetime event, that's something that, we have to learn to deal with. But, for me, I guess we were out of power for a couple of days. And once we got to rolling blackouts, I tell you, actually, ironically, when the power went off here, I had comfort because I knew that meant somebody else had heat in their house and somebody else had power. And hopefully that meant their pipes were not going to freeze and have, all the damage to clean up. So obviously the legislature started the hearings today, and I'm glad the governor's made it an emergency item, which means, we just got to figure out exactly what are the precision issues. I dealt with this in 2011 when we had the rolling blackouts and winterization legislation, but this is more than a winterization event. I mean, that is part of it, but there's also much more complicated pieces that really need to be dealt with. And we just need to make sure that we do it in a rolling fashion. In other words, my point is 5 years from now, 10 years from now, ensure that those issues, if the system has changed, we're keeping up with the times is, what I'm getting at. Because obviously we have a different portfolio of energy uses today than we did 10 years ago. And we need to make sure we keep up with the times. Too often I've seen you work on an issue and you solve it, but then times change and that solution doesn't apply anymore, or it's deviated from it. So that's the only caution as someone who's been around this process for almost 2 decades. Hard to imagine that, but that's why I got that gray hair on my side.
I'm not seeing much of you. Look about the same as you always have.
I tell you, I don't feel with it. I visited with a state representative from another part of the state just earlier today, kind of via this format. And when I looked on their bio and saw that they were in their very early 30s, and I thought, man, I used to not have bags under my eyes, and I used to actually have dark hair too back in those days. So it brought back some old memories when I was much younger. But anyway,
well, I'm going to have Matt Foster with AT&T do a brief introduction, and then I'm going to start asking you some questions. And I know that we've only got you until 11 o'clock, so we'll be efficient.
Let's do that.
Matt?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bill and Comptroller. It's an honor to have you here. Just as a brief introduction for those that don't know, Comptroller Hegar is the Chief Financial Officer of the state of Texas, which is the state's treasurer, check writer, tax collector, procurement officer, and revenue estimator, which is a lot. A job that is particularly important these days as the state addresses the impacts of COVID, as well as the weakness in the oil and gas markets. As the CFO of the world's 9th largest economy, Comptroller Hegar is charged with maintaining the state's fiscal health. Having served in both the Texas House and Senate, Comptroller Hegar has gained a reputation for customer service, transparency in government, and conservative fiscal management. He is a graduate of the Texas A&M University. I'll wait for the whoop. And a graduate of St. Mary's, where he earned his Master of Arts and his law degree, and the University of Arkansas, where he earned his Master's of Law. He's a 6th-generation Texan who grew up on farming land that has been in his family since the 1800s. He is joining us today from Katy, Texas, where he shares his house with his wife and 3 children. I'm pleased to introduce Comptroller Hegar. There you go.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that kind introduction.
So, Comptroller, I want to go back to what we were just talking about. And I think many of us read an opinion piece that you wrote that appeared in the Dallas Morning News about 4 days ago that said, 10 years ago, I wrote a law to require power generations to plan for winter. Too many didn't. What happened?
Yeah, I think that, back in just real quick, 11, we had rolling blackouts in a portion of the state. If I recall correctly, we had about 50 some odd counties that were impacted by that event, where this one was disaster declared in 254. So, the wide breadth of how many Texans were impacted by this winter storm was much greater than we've ever dealt with before. But I think there's a combination of things. And that's one reason I was, asked to write the op-ed, but I wanted to make sure that people understood that we're still seeking some of the answers as exactly what went wrong. But with that being said, back then it was about trying to make sure our facilities were winterized. Well, obviously we weren't in the shape that we needed to be in, and personally, I feel like we're in a worse shape than where we were in 2011 because we had rolling blackouts and now we didn't. But part of it is, one, facilities were not winterized. And that's one of the questions we're going to have. Do we want to winterize our facilities like we would if we lived in North Dakota? You know, I think I heard Leach mention the comment that our system is designed much more for summer heat than it is for winter. But we also got to make sure that we don't have millions of people without power for days on end. A few hours is obviously acceptable. And so my point, you know, anything that facilities take on, whether that's a state mandate or a carrot versus a stick approach, whatever the legislature decides, you know, you and I, the ratepayers or the taxpayers, ultimately it comes back to us. But I think number one, it had to do with winterization of facilities. And that's not just natural gas, coal, nuclear. We have 2 nuclear facilities. One of the 2 went down for a period of time. And part of that, again, was a safety valve issue. And so therefore we had wind turbines. Solar obviously doesn't work at night. And so we have to address each one of those differently. But then also one of the questions that I've continued to point out is, why is it that in certain regions of the state, the power providers were able to successfully have rolling blackouts where people came on and came off, where other parts of the state they could not? Now, part of that was electrical equipment that froze once generation went off. And so therefore, I think we have to address that issue. And then lastly, but not inclusively of everything, but one of the main questions that I have is, are there additional procedures and protocols that need to be put into place so we didn't have to hit the button so hard when so much load had to be shed? And in another component to bring in is, even when natural gas facilities needed to get back online, there were issues with gas being froze in pipelines. Again, you know, Texas is a summer area, and there were congestion issues with trying to get it around. So I think, you know, the good thing is the legislature started those hearings today. The governor made it an emergency item. I don't think we know all of the issues, but those are 3 or 4 of the ones that we know of. And then lastly, another piece is going to ask, over time, that spot market price that has moved up over time and up to $9,000 per megawatt, which a megawatt will heat or cool or electricity for about 200 homes. And so now you see the issue of that price that spiked because demand was so high for the rare ones that were able to produce. The question is does that need to be lowered? Does the state have to play a role in this somehow? Because there was a tremendous amount of money being changed hands over those days. And that's another issue that really hasn't surfaced yet, but that's one that's very problematic that we're going to have to figure out as a state. And there's a lot of people that are working on it. I've been in communication with many legislators, the governor, on that issue frequently, because service providers had to pay that. Many of us have fixed rates in our electricity, which you hear about some who have the variable rates, and those are the ones that are going to get very exorbitant bills where they may be normally used to a $50 or $200 bill. Well, that variable rate went this number. And so therefore they have to pay the generators those dollars. And the question is, you know, most of them don't have that kind of cash reserves or that lending capacity. And that's a very real issue that has to be resolved now for this, what just happened, but we also need to figure it out if and when we ever have an event again.
We've got summer coming up. I mean, you know, there's another potential. We'll have rolling, power shortages in the summer. So
Yeah.
your former colleague, Senator Sibley, wrote in today's newspaper, I co-authored the law that deregulated the Texas electrical grid. ERCOT didn't cause winter outages. Lawmakers should grant regulators the power to enforce weatherization rules for generators. You agree with that?
I actually agree with making sure we have a stronger approach, because what I was trying to do in 2011 was make sure the regulators had the same winterization reports as ERCOT did. ERCOT's not the regulator. ERCOT is the one that buys the electricity. They sell the electricity. Essentially, they're the middle person. And then they take the service provider's money. They send that to the generators, and then they are overall making sure the entire grid works. They do spot inspections, but they're not necessarily the regulator. So I wanted PUC to actually receive those, put a report together, but there's not, and it was designed to have fines put into place. And there's been a few that have been given, but I think if you have a little bit stronger stick, then sometimes that functions as a carrot to make sure. But again, I think it's extremely important the legislature ask the question, to what level are we trying to winterize? And again, are we trying to winterize a state that we know we have this, we will probably have something cold again in 10 years, hopefully not to the level we did, but do we want to pay to winterize like a North Dakota? There's probably a middle ground is my point that's more cost efficient for us, the ratepayers, than going to say, oh, let's winterize like we live in North Dakota or Alaska. We don't. There's a common sense between the two, and that's the threshold the legislature needs to figure out, and we need to have as a policy here in this state, in my opinion.
So a lot of the appropriators in the legislature breathed a big sigh of relief when you did your most recent revenue estimate, and told them they were only going to be about $1 billion short compared to last session versus 4, 5, or 6 billion. Is that still going to hold, and particularly with what's happened over this last week?
Yeah. So, if you, I tell you, it's amazing with my shop is that every revenue estimate we provide, and just kind of put a perspective, with the day before session, I tell the legislature how much money we think will come in the state treasury. And that doesn't start for a budget for 9 more months. September 1 is when that 2-year budget starts. And then it ends 24 months after that. So our crystal ball has to look way out into the future. And so I always make the point, when you're the 9th largest economy in the world, you're very tied to the global economy, being the largest exporter out of the nation. Texas is 19% of all the exports out of the US. We're very tied internationally, and things that happen elsewhere have ripple effects into our economy, good or bad. And so therefore, in the last year, the amount of uncertainty is greater than ever before. And so every time, we get a couple more months of data, that's been very helpful. And I've been saying that almost like a broken record for the last year, couple more months. And then of course, last week's event throws a complete curveball, and the next 2 months of data that I receive is not going to be the best data. And part of that is because last week we had no sales tax, and sales tax, everyone, is 60% of all the tax collections that I receive. So therefore, sales tax has held up better than we thought in the last year. Instead of being about 10% down every month compared to the same month a year ago, it's been about 5% on average, which that's one of the reasons the legislature is in a better position from a revenue standpoint. But this last week's event, obviously last week and this month, probably we're not going to have as much sales tax reported. Now, part of that is because we delayed the timing of sales tax receipts to us for a week. So some of that's going to fall in next month, if that makes sense. So we're going to have 2 odd looking months is what I'm getting at. And so it's hard to figure out, well, what data are we living in? And then ironically, unfortunately, an event like this will cause a lot of people to go purchase items that actually has sales tax applied to it, as unfortunately they're rebuilding parts of their home, whether they're rebuilding their offices. So ironically, the damage that is done to individuals and to businesses, they have to go replace this, and that actually puts the state receiving more money as a result because of that rebuild, almost ironically. And so that's part of the confusion that adds into. But far as decreased productivity, an impact to our GDP immediately because things are not functioning as they were just a few weeks ago, then yes, that impacts the state economy. But overall, we haven't even started to try to look at what is that 1 year, 2 year, 3 year outlook. We will, like we did with Hurricane Harvey. But the fact is, I feel like from a state revenue standpoint, it's not going to substantially impact the state treasury as what the legislature has to work with this legislative session as they're putting the new budget together.
What is I believe as a part of your revenue estimate, you target a certain price per barrel of oil as kind of, the minimum in order to achieve the revenue estimate. What was that price in your most recent estimate?
So that price is around the low $50 range, moving up slightly into the second year of the biennium. Usually I also not only point out what production price is for barrel of oil, but also what production volume is. Now, the Permian Basin has been the field of most prolific growth, not just in the United States, but literally around the world the last several years. Production actually went down. We think it will slowly increase, but it's not going to ratchet back up. And then one of the points that I also make is when you look at the NYMEX futures, 12-month futures for oil and gas prices, those that deal in oil and gas, they have a 95% certainty that oil prices in the next year are probably going to be somewhere between $24 and about $85 a barrel. So I make that point that if the market is 95% certain it's going to be between here and here, us being somewhere in the middle is a pretty good sweet spot. And so, we don't add the two and divide by, we don't add them together and divide by two to find the mean is my point. But, I throw that out there only because I highlight the point that it is an extremely volatile commodity. I usually hand out to legislators a chart that shows the last 20 years in sales tax collections, motor vehicle, and oil and gas severance taxes. And interestingly, oil severance tax collections in the last 20 years has gone up on average 7-point-something%. But if you look up and down that chart, you can't find a single year where it went up or down single digits. It's always double digits up and down. And I highlight that just because it's hard to forecast. And that's why that 95% certainty, is so wild. Now, one thing that Texas is blessed on is while that's an important part of our economy, severance taxes don't typically go to what funds the basic elements of the state budget. 75% of it goes into our state savings account, the rainy day fund, and/or it moves over to transportation funding, an equal amount, half and half, as long as that savings account has about 8% of what we normally would spend in what we call general related revenue. And so that's a nice position to be in. So when we had the downturn in oil and manufacturing in 15 and 16, every other state that has a portion of their revenues from severance tax, the other oil and gas states in the nation, they had dings on their credit rating where Texas did not. Because in part, we don't fund basic elements of our state services off of that. We put it over to the side, which is nice to have when you have a downturn in the economy. You have that nest egg per se to help smooth out the balances in your funding as you look forward in different types of expenditures for the state budget is my point.
Would it make more sense for Texas to budget on an annual basis versus a biennial basis?
Yeah, I've been asked that question quite a lot. One of the things is obviously our forecast is pretty far out. With that being said, trying to forecast what the two biggest portions of expenditures for the state budget, which is public education funding. And I say that only because what is the local and the state share? So those two, that's a long runway. And then Medicaid. Medicaid is a large portion of the state budget. If you have a certain income level and below, those people are eligible for Medicaid from a healthcare side. And so even though that's about 60-40 with the federal dollars versus the state dollars, those two are far to forecast out that far. But I was glad the legislature wasn't in session last year because other revenue departments were trying to figure out what this economy was doing last March, April, May, and June. And I was glad that I had a little bit more of a runway to get better data. And we didn't have to give. So while we lowered our estimate, and as you mentioned earlier, we thought the current 2-year budget, which ends August of this year, was going to have a $4.5 billion deficit. Thankfully, they weren't in session and had to go off that number because since then the economy's been better. We've had online sales tax collections, which we didn't have before, and those have grown during the pandemic. We've also had some federal dollars come in that we didn't anticipate. And so all those combined really put the legislature in a really good spot for this current 2-year budget. And so therefore, my point is if they were in session, they would have probably had to take actions to cut the budget even more than what we did. So, sometimes having that 2-year look gives you a little bit more cushion to figure out where you're going, where other states didn't have that opportunity.
When do you anticipate updating your revenue estimate?
So if I'm going to update it, and I will give some number, it may be the same revenue estimate, could be slightly higher, lower, depending on obviously a wide variety of factors. But from a timing perspective, that needs to be done there at the last part of April, the beginning of May. At least, as a former member, been in the House and the Senate, I know that anything later than that doesn't do them much good, even though they don't leave until somewhere around the 1st of June, whatever. I don't remember what that date is. But the budget process really needs it right there at the end of April or beginning of May. And then obviously during the time between 2 legislative sessions, we will update it if it's necessary, even though they're not there. So one of the things that I've done, we go out to borrow a significant amount of money, typically every year, because the state pays the school districts 50% of their state share in September, October, and November. So when we send them about 48–50% of all the money, we front load it. So that means from an income and expenditure timing, Texas has huge expenditures there that first week of December, but we don't necessarily have the revenues to cover it. So therefore we go out for 1 year borrowing. And so since we're doing our cash flow forecast anyway, from a timing perspective in the summer is a really good time for me to update because my team has done all the heavy lifting on those forecasts anyway.
I want to remind folks, if you want to ask a question of the controller, we've only got about 7 more minutes. Put it in chat. I want to pivot quickly to the Economic Stabilization Fund, or the Rainy Day Fund, as it's popularly known, and ask you 2 questions or maybe a comment. You championed legislation that allowed the fund to earn more money than what it had previously been allowed to invest in. And I want to ask you about the results of that. What did that mean for the Rainy Day Fund? And then how does our savings account compare to other states' savings accounts?
Yeah, so Texas right now, we forecast that we have about $10 billion in that state savings account. There's a little bit of expenses yet to go from expenses they appropriated last cycle. It all doesn't go out immediately. But come this time next year, or 2 years from now, let me say, if we were having this venue again, and hopefully by then we'll be in person. This is a great trade-off, but I only see a few faces, and I don't know if everybody's going to sleep or if they're engaged, but at least if we're in a room, I can read body language, know I need to tell a joke and bring everybody back in. So a little bit harder by this. So hopefully in 2 years from now, but 2 years from now, we'll have about $11.5 billion in that fund, we anticipate, unless they use some of that money this session, which I'm not necessarily convinced that they need to because of the downturn in the economy, but they may want to do some one-time expenses that normally, they'll do just one type expense that they need to do something for. So relative to the rest of the nation, we're very blessed because we have a very large economic stabilization fund or state savings account. Most states don't have anywhere near that whatsoever. And what I did a few years ago, once I got in this job, a little over 7 years ago, I was a little shocked and surprised that I couldn't believe we had I knew we had $6.5 billion in that fund, but we were required by state statute to do what? Keep it in the treasury pool. And in essence, what that meant, keep it in overnight cash. I mean, who would keep $6.5 billion in overnight cash? Because even though you had a hurricane, even though we've had a winter storm, we may use some of it, but those expenses are timed over time. And so we have an investment wing for some of the dollars that we've been entrusted with, endowments that the state has charged the Comptroller's office with. And so we don't try to make, significant risky returns. We don't try to make, something that's too complicated, but the point is to try to make a higher rate of return on that. So I've mentioned that to the legislature many times. They did over the course of the last 2 sessions give us more flexibility. And so what that meant is, at least in those portions we've been able to invest, we brought in about $300 million more than what we would have otherwise. Now that's not over the whole fund, it's pieces of it. But last session, they enabled us to invest 75% of it in something that overnight cash. And I think probably right now we're at about 50% of it. We're slowly doing it over time as we see opportunities that look good to invest your money, but at the same time, not have too risky situation for the state and the state tax dollars.
Gotcha. You have been a proponent of having the state shore up some of the pension funds for public employees, and also taking care of some of the state's physical assets that are in need of repair. Where do you see that conversation at during this legislative session?
Now, say that first part of the question again.
So you have been a proponent of having the state shore up the actuarial, soundness.
Yeah. So, Texas, one of the things since I've gotten this role, I've been pushing really hard to talk about those long-term balance sheet issues, because I know that you're there for you're there to pass a 2-year budget. But, we've taken some really good steps on road infrastructure funding, water infrastructure funding, flood control issues after Hurricane Harvey. I think undoubtedly we will deal more with weatherization of our electrical grid and reliability in the electrical grid. But one of the things that I've talked about consistently, and I made this point in House Appropriations this last Monday, I made it in Senate Finance, is we need to do more on our employee retirement system, our pension systems. So last session, the legislature did some positive steps in what's called the teacher retirement system. However, the employee retirement system, we're not like Chicago, we're not like New Jersey, but I don't want us to be like those states. And, you know, as I've told them, you can't essentially take it all in one bite, but we can get on a path to actually make it more structurally sound over the long term. So therefore, you know, we are not in a position where future generations have to pay that bill.
Gotcha. Well, Comptroller, we greatly appreciate your time. I think one other quick question for you. I was asked by Governor Abbott to chair his Broadband Development Council last year. We produced our report for the legislature recommending that there be created a broadband office in the state and a broadband plan and ultimately a fund. Representative Ashby and Senator Nichols have both filed bills that would put the broadband office in your office. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I've talked to both of them about that. I've actually talked about broadband over the course of the last several years. You know, I think we've talked about broadband quite often, but the pandemic has shown us that it's more than about economic development in rural communities. It's also about telemedicine. It's also about education. And so therefore, I see this session as the opportunity of bringing all those converging issues that we're going to actually get something accomplished. And I've told both of them that, you know, I'm not looking for a new job, but if you give us a new job, I promise you, you know, we've set up programs that we can make sure they are operating the way you want them to do. I'm happy to work with them. Again, I told them, I said, I'm not going to go advocate for it. I got plenty to do, but if you entrust us with it, we're going to set it up right. And we're going to make sure that it functions the way it's supposed to function. It's an extremely important issue. And I'm glad that they're working on that this session. I'll mention real quick, just because while I've got y'all still here, one of the things that I always try to squeeze in no matter what in the minute left that we have is unclaimed property. If you actually live somewhere, you put a utility deposit down, you forgot your utility deposit, there's a whole lot of ways for unclaimed property. But those of you that live in Dallas County, my office has those dollars. We get those dollars from businesses. We put them on the website, claimittexas.org. Again, claimittexas.org. In the last few years, we've returned back to taxpayers about $300 million of their unclaimed property. In Dallas County, if you live in Dallas County, we have about $612 million in unclaimed property. If you live in Collin County, it's about $117 million. And so there's significant amount of money. I encourage you to go see claimittexas.org, your name or family or friends, and hopefully we'll return the money back to you. And then lastly, those of you that live in the Metroplex, not just those two counties, but the greater Metroplex, in the combined counties, the take-home pay of the people that live in that region, if it was a state, and don't get any ideas, but if it was a state in and of itself, it would be the 15th largest state in the nation from a take-home pay. So, you know, I make that point because you add up all 12 economic regions in the state and you quickly get to Texas being the 9th largest economy in the world. So thanks for letting me be here. And next time, hopefully we'll be in person.
Comptroller, thank you so much. You know, I've, you know, had the privilege of working with you when you were in the Senate and a little bit in the House. And just for everybody else, I have to tell you that I've always admired Glenn Hegar as being one of the took his stewardship of the state seriously. He has the long-term view. He's often referred to as the adult in the room. I think you see why. So, Comptroller, thanks for being with us today. We appreciate your time. Ladies and gentlemen, we're adjourned for this session, but get back on noon at the Texas Trib to hear Harold Dutton, the new chair of the House Public Education Committee. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.